to. Here we are. It's midterm time, and it's amazing how time flies when you're having fun. I still can't believe that it is midterm time, but here we are, so let's just jump into it and see what you need to know about the midterm exam. And so the first thing you need to know is that it is occurring on Halloween night. It will run for, well, 6 days. It'll run Thursday through Thursday. They are closed. The testing lab is closed on Sunday, of course. So you will have pretty much a week to get it done. And what you need to do is, of course, contact the testing lab. That's where the exam will be held, in the testing lab in the center building, room 456. And what you need to do is contact them for their hours. It is a computer objective exam as such. What it means is it's just you're taking the computer or you're taking the exam on a computer. So there'll be 50 questions, which will cover everything from day one through this week. And the good news is that you are allowed one 3x5 note card in the testing center. I need to emphasize that it's just one, that's all. Not 20, not 100, just one. You can put the information that you need on front and back if you so desire, but they do take the card from you. They do examine it very carefully. So don't go in like one guy did with about 500 cards, and it didn't work. So again, what I always tell students is the stuff you know, don't bother writing it down. And the stuff that you really recognize and know and it just comes naturally to you, don't bother with it. It's the stuff that can be confusing. Put that on your note card, and that way I'm sure you'll be able to just go right through the exam with no trouble at all. Okay, the study guide is available on Moodle. It's more or less what I'm talking about tonight. I'm probably giving a little more detail tonight than what's on the study guide, but it will give you a good idea of information that you need to know on the exam. So if you go through the study guide and you say, oh man, I really don't know what block booking is. I know what it is, but I can't remember what it is. Well, that's one of those things you put on the note card. So if it pops up, and it probably will, then you go, I know, it's on my note card. There, block booking, I know what I'm doing. So that's the kind of thing there that helps you out. Okay, we move on, and let me emphasize that you are responsible for your exam. It is your responsibility, not mine, to make the exam date and time. So that's why it is absolutely crucial that you check their website at that address. It's also in the syllabus to find out what their hours of operation are, because you don't want to go there when they're closed, obviously. And the other thing is, and I can't overemphasize this, and it confuses me why I have to, but you don't go in 5 minutes until closing and expect them to hang around and let you finish the exam. All right, so that's why you need to know their hours of operation. Okay, there'll be no makeup examinations, so I'll get it. I do get it every term that grandmother has died again, and so I couldn't make the exam, but that's too bad. Get there on time. You have a week to do it. So be responsible. Okay, what's on it? This is what we're going to be covering. It's going to cover everything, and that's what I mean, everything, from the classic Hollywood style, which was the first week, through the romantic comedy this week. So what do you need to know about all of that? Well, let's start. First, you have a good understanding of the overview of the American movie industry, which is essentially those three things right there. when we talk about the American movie industry at this point, at this stage, it's a little bit different in today's modern age, but when we're talking about the classical Hollywood cinema, we're talking about production, distribution, and exhibition. In other words, the studios produce the movies, they distribute the movies to their own theaters. Now, granted, there are other independent theaters out there, but essentially that's what they're doing. They're producing and distributing and sending them to their own theaters. Again, like Paramount Pictures produces its movie at the Paramount Pictures lot, then they distribute their pictures through the Paramount Film Distributing Corporation to Paramount Theaters. So that's what I always say. If you've ever been in a town or a city that has a Paramount Theater, it's because the Paramount movie company owned the Paramount Theater. Okay, so that's how that worked. The second thing you need to understand about the overview here is the bottom point there, the industry's use of genre to minimize financial risk. Now, we'll talk about that when we get to genre, but essentially what that says is they make films that people want to see, and there are themes to that. So it's like, golly gee whiz, we made a Western. Excuse me. People like Westerns. So we'll make another Western because people like to see Westerns. So that's how they minimize financial risk. Excuse me, and we move on. Early projection technology and persistence of vision. You do know, of course, that persistence of vision is 24 frames per second. That's what we usually refer to. It is that there are 24, now with sound movies, 24 frames, individual pictures go by in a second and gives the illusion of movement. It's the way the eyes perceive it. So when we sit there in a darkened theater watching this movement, we're seeing this stuff go by at 24 frames per second, and the brain is convinced that there's movement there. The key innovations and the individuals that are involved recognize what a kinetoscope is, who Edison was and who Dixon was. They are working here. They're creating for us the technology of movies. The Nickelodeon era, put a nickel in the Nickelodeon. Nope, not that Nickelodeon. It's the movie theater where you put a nickel down to go in and you watch interesting things on a screen. And understand what the MPPC is all about. That's the Motion Pictures Patents Company that existed from 1908 to about 1915. A Supreme Court ruling said, no, you can't control all that movie stuff. And so they kind of broke up the monopoly that Edison had. And then the development of the movie palace. This is above and beyond the Nickelodeon era. This is the giant movie theater, which often were vaudeville theaters that got converted to movie theaters. But they are huge palaces that will seat thousands, have balconies, have loges, and you see major motion pictures in these palaces. And it's like going into a fantasy land, because as I mentioned during our first meeting, that often these kind of movie palaces had names like the Egyptian, like the Chinese or the Oriental, these kinds of themes or motifs that ran through the theater. So as you walked into this palace, it was like walking into another world because the architecture followed the exotic land at the time. There used to be a beautiful theater in Portland called the Oriental. It was really quite a theater. And it was shaped, you know, like the Chinatown kind of thing if you go through San Francisco. And you go inside, and it was like walking into a movie set. It was just a different world. Okay, moving on. Classical narrative style, ways in which cinematic stories are told. Okay, they went through a lot of this. And it is pretty simple. The first thing is equilibrium and disruption. What is that? It is this. An initial state of affairs is introduced after which something occurs to disturb this equilibrium. That's from the book. Essentially what they're saying there is everything is normal. Everything is equal. There's no problems. That's how we enter the movie. Everything is fine. Subsequent events attempt to, let me finish the last part of that. Then something occurs to disturb that equilibrium, whatever that may be. In most cases, it's a villain. It's some evil, nasty person that arrives to disrupt the equilibrium because he wants to control the world, or he wants to come and take this guy's wife away from him, or he wants to do whatever, but that equilibrium is upset. Now, that's an easy way to look at it. In other films, perhaps what happens is, what destroys or disturbs that equilibrium? A major storm. It could be a tornado that strikes a town. Like what was the name of that movie? You guys know that. I can't remember. It came out many years ago, but it was all that CGI. Twister was, Twister was the name of it. Okay, but they did all that CGI stuff of a tornado. Or it could be a hurricane. It could be any kind of a natural occurrence like that. It is something that occurs to disrupt and disturb that equilibrium. Okay, subsequent events attempt to restore the original status quo, but this is repeatedly frustrated, and order is recovered only at the end of the film. Again, that's easy to see. You can see that in most any film. It's not like, okay, the hero comes in and rescues the damsel from the evil villain, and then the movie's over. So we've had it for about 15 minutes, the movie's over. But when you run for a feature-length movie, he is always thwarted in his efforts to rescue this person. And that's part of the excitement that we like in going to a movie, is knowing, oh my gosh, what would happen if you went to the movie now? What would happen if you walked into the theater now, sat down, and the bad guy comes in, does this horrible stuff, and the good guy comes to town, and the good guy catches the bad guy, and they go off. And you go, wait a minute, something's wrong here. I'm supposed to be here for 2 hours. What's going to happen? This isn't right. And of course not. He gets thwarted in everything that he's trying, It's one step forward and maybe 3 steps backwards, that sort of thing. Okay, and of course it's all leading up to, what else, but the climax when he finally succeeds and the movie is done with. And instead of, in the old days, like when I used to go to the movies, it says the end, and you go, okay, it's over, and we leave. Now you have a whole nother reel of all these words going up. Okay, now, problem solving. What is that? Problem solving. Over the course of the narrative, characters struggle to achieve their goals or solve their problems. All right, character studies, it can vary. It can be as simple as, I've got to overcome this evil that this guy's doing so that we can get things back to order. Or it might be something within the person himself, a character study that says, I've got a flaw within me. What must I overcome, inside myself? How can I solve this problem? They overcome those who stand in their way, triumph over adverse circumstances, and or transcend their own limitations. And often in films where we are really rooting for the hero we find that he's a reluctant hero. And we really want him to transcend that reluctance, whatever it may be. He might be, a coward or something who overcomes that cowardice to achieve a goal, or, we all know what that is. This is pretty easy stuff. When you put it down, you got it in words here, and you look at it and you go, yeah, I know what movies are about now. Yeah. Okay. Temporal and spatial limits. What are they? The temporal dimension is a specific deadline has to be met, or a certain task has to be completed by a definite time. And I've mentioned this before in a movie called DOA that was made in the late 40s. It is actually in real time. It actually takes place in 90 minutes, or 88, or whatever the movie actually, the way it runs. But it is actually in that real time, and it is a guy who's been poisoned. It's kind of an interesting film. He's been poisoned. He's going to die in 90 minutes. And now we spend 90 minutes with him trying to find out the guy that poisoned him. Spatial dimension, characters moving toward precise destination or geographical goals. That's pretty obvious as well. You're moving from one place to another. Westerns that depict the wagon train, moving from St. Louis to Independence, Missouri to Independence, Oregon, or whatever. You follow that spatial time and what you encounter as you move along. Okay, the journey. This is my favorite thing. Narrative. The characters move not only spatially, but they realize other non-spatial goals as well, such as making deadlines, solving mysteries, falling in love, discovering new worlds, and coming to terms with themselves and or their fellow travelers. Okay, the journey is a very important part of any narrative. It's this, a person embarks on a journey that is both physical in the sense that I'm moving from this location to that location, but it's also in a psychic sense, in a psychological sense, in the sense that I am growing or whatever. I am going from where I'm at right now, and I am achieving a certain maturity here as I move along. It is those kinds of things that we find in good films, good Hollywood films. But also, as the series tells us, and the book certainly denotes, this is also an audience's journey. This is what I like about movies, which I don't find, it doesn't do me much for TV, but you go to the movies, you know, and even Hollywood recognized that, because in 1958, they had a promotion that went everywhere around. It was, go out to a movie tonight. That was a simple thing that they put on their advertising. Go out to a movie tonight. So you actually move. What we see on the screen is what we are doing at that very moment, because we are also looking for goals. We are also participating in deadlines, and we are also undertaking journeys. We are with the characters as they move through these things. There is a sense of identity with it. Watching Cinema Paradiso, that Italian film of many years ago, was fun because it was about this kid that just couldn't get enough going to the movies. And that's what it was all about for this kid, was that he got involved in those movies. He just sat there glued to them, and you could see, and the way the filmmakers made it, of course, is that he is really into this movie. He is with those characters. Okay, and lastly, segmentation. They made a quick point about this with regard to Aristotle's traditional unities. What's that? Segmentation is a process of structural analysis that breaks the film down into its basic narrative units. Now, number two, dramatic unities, according to Aristotle, action, time, and space. Most films violate the traditional unities and lend themselves to that segmentation. Segmentation is essentially how movies are made as well. If you've ever seen a movie script, you will see that everything is broken down into scenes. It is, the things are broken down into these segments. And even in, I don't know how they do it today. I know in the old ways, it was often, okay, we've got scenes 21, 103, 208, and scene 562, which is the last scene in the movie. They all take place in this one setting. And what do? We film all of those at once in that setting. So you have your actors going in at the very beginning of the movie, and they're supposed to change by the end of this movie, but they're doing what they did in the very first part of the movie. They're now finishing up at that same day. They're finishing their role. Very, very much unlike what you do in a play. It's not linear. It is segmented. Okay, moving on. Classical film style, film techniques and relationships to narrative. Recognize these words, like know what mise en scène is. The French word which means putting on the scene. It's what you see. Mise en scène is what you see in the frame. That's all it is. Don't try to put anything more to it. It's what you see within that frame. If you're looking at it in a very simple, traditional, classical film, you see it essentially a 4:3 image. You know, later on in the 1950s, you see it wider. It's more what we call today 16:9. Although some of those aspect ratios are a little bit different, but it's a wide screen versus a square. But it's everything that is within that frame. Knowing camera movement techniques, that you can what? You can move the camera laterally. You can move it with somebody, and what you have there is a moving shot kind of a thing, or you can dolly in. You can move on the Z-axis, moving into the camera. Or the complement to that is moving it back, moving away from it. You can crane it. You can move it high and low. Lighting, the different types and effects. You know, 3-point lighting. That's the basic setup for any scene. 3-point lighting. Understand sound as the mics, the mixing, scoring, continuity. Know a shot versus a scene. Know that. A shot is simply turning the camera on, turning the camera off. But a scene is a dramatic part of it. The scene acts out something. The shot simply turns it on, turns it off. Scene editing, between and within scenes. Hollywood is known for its invisible editing. You're not supposed to know that anything is going on, but it's cutting from wide shot to medium shot to close shot, those kinds of things. The scene organization, is it linear? Is it circular? Is it a flashback? Cross-cutting. Cross-cutting are things that are occurring simultaneously. And yet, and we recognize that, and when we cut back and forth. The perfect example of that is, you know, the old chase scene from the old days of silent serials with the woman tied to the railroad tracks, and you got the train coming, and you got the villain trying to escape, and you got the hero coming, and all those things are going on at the same time, and yet we're cutting among those things. Point of view editing, and the 180-degree rule, which is don't cross the line. That's a filmmaking term, of course. You want to maintain continuity with that, and we move on. The studio system. The Motion Picture Patents Company, we already mentioned that. The key players in the creation of the early studio system. Those people right there are very significant. William Fox, Carl Laemmle, Louis B. Mayer, Samuel Goldwyn, and Marcus Lowe. Okay, these are pretty much the founders of this studio system, as we call it. The strategies of control. Remember, it's an oligopoly, what we call vertical integration, and that's what we already mentioned. It's production, distribution, and exhibition. They control the whole works. Recognize blind booking and block booking, know what runs, zones, and clearances are. And we already mentioned the Sherman antitrust ruling against the MPCC in 1915, which more or less opened up the movie business to anybody that wanted to make movies. The 5 major studios: Paramount, Lowe's Incorporated, which owns MGM, Fox and 20th Century Fox, a merger in the early 1930s between William Fox and Darryl Zanuck's 20th Century Pictures, the Warner Brothers, who give us sound for essentially the first time, and RKO Radio Pictures. And then you have the 3 minor studios: United Artists, Universal, and Columbia. And moving right on, low-budget filmmakers, Poverty Row, know these companies like Republic, Monogram, Grand National, and so forth. And also the Department of Justice Paramount case in 1958, which broke up that oligopoly. In that case, you know, they couldn't own all 3 anymore. You had to give up one of them, so they gave up, naturally, exhibition. The effect of the breakup on film production, average cost of film production rose over time, And of course, it's the rise of the film artisans and independent film producers. And so essentially what you have today is old studios are now financiers, distributors of independently made films. They're bankers, essentially. What you do is an independent company goes to Paramount and says, make this movie. And they'll say, oh, okay, how much you need? We need $80 billion. Okay, you got it. Most of the time it's, go away, son, you bother me. Also look at the star. Stars have masks or personas. These were created at the time by film studios. The film studio owned you, everything about you. The role of mass media and public in making and breaking stars, and that's really what it is. It's you either like them or you don't like them. The blacks and other minority stars, they emphasize here Sidney Poitier, the man who kind of broke the color barrier. In those crazy movies that were made in the 70s, known as blaxploitation movies, like my favorite was Blackenstein. Okay, since breakup of the studio system, stars can make it via other media, for example, music and television. Okay, now here's the significance about genre. It's the ability to categorize movies. Yes, genre serves to stabilize an otherwise unstable movie industry, and the key word is familiarity. Familiarity. That is what it is. We recognize the same stuff all over again, and we want to see more of them. Each new film banks on a number of familiar elements, motifs, and themes, but in a new way. To put it in a very blunt way, like all you musicians, it's theme and variation. Here's a Western. We all know what the Western's going to be like, but my Western's a little bit different than your Western. It's just variation, okay? So what we do is we look at it like the Western, which is distinctly American, based on dime novels and real-life characters in the beginning, when it starts. There are three essential ingredients in the Western: the hero, the villain, and the landscape. The landscape. That's why in the 1950s we have a kind of a classic period of Westerns, because part of that was cinemascope. Vastness, to show the vastness of the landscape. Symbolism. East meets West. Fact meets fiction. Culture versus nature. Culture, they all talked about that. The last Western, space films. The final frontier. Space films, essentially Westerns, only they're set in a different place, outer space. American comedy, comic expression of social repression. What you find themes in American economy or comedy: racism, social integration, comic disintegration and disorder, containing chaos. You know, containing chaos is essentially all the wild things that happens in comedies, like the Mack Sennett wild chase scene. All that chaos that goes on, but it's all contained, and you know you're safe. Class and democracy. Know the popular comedy actors. That's an important part here. It's the history and type of comedy that occurs. With silent comedy, you get slapstick. It is visual, and it is done by no one better than Charlie Chaplin and no one better than Buster Keaton. They lead the way in the slapstick comedy. With early sound, you get verbal wit. And this verbal wit comes to us courtesy of Laurel and Hardy and the Marx Brothers. You know, the Marx Brothers in that movie, you know, how I woke up and I got up and shot an elephant in my pajamas, you know, and then he says, now how he got in my pajamas, I'll never know. You know, that kind of verbal wit thing. Okay, romantic and screwball comedy, hybrid of the romantic story and slapstick. Comedies following the screwball are thesis comedies, black dark comedy, raunchy, and all of that. Okay, we've come to it. If you're confused like I am, that's all right. Come and see me tomorrow or send an email. Remember that the study guide is available. Remember, it's on the web right now. It's on Moodle. And there's no makeup exams, and you are responsible for the exam. And the end. Thank you. That's it. We made it. I hear the music. Goodbye. Yeah, always have to get in there. I always talk too much, so I have to really...
online. Learn, unlearn, relearn.